somehow trying to think about a timeline for this, or if I had to make an outline to explain this to a class, I would be like, wait, I forgot. Wait, I have to go back. Towards, because like Val Kilmer, like he finds him in the middle of the ocean, but this might have been set up. So I don't know if they shot down the plane, but that's not the point. So anyway, so they find him in the ocean, and then, you know, there's like this little pygmy guy, and he plays piano with Marlon Brando, and then, and it just like forever. Oh, and then there's Marlon Brando's daughter. And I just feel like my brain was mush after this. Like, I would like literally looked at my notes and I was like, they make no sense. Just like this movie.
Yeah, and you describing the plot just now kind of was me going, oh, okay, that was the plot of the movie.
Welcome to Certain POV's Another Pass podcast with Case and Sam, where we take another look at movies that we find fascinating but flawed. Let's see how we could have fixed them.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Another Pass podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hi.
And today, we are continuing our trek through so many weird anthropomorphic animal movies. You thought we would be done after the Planet of the Apes. You thought we'd be done after Ninja Turtles 2.
You were wrong.
But today, we kind of have the father of them all.
The piece de resistance.
Today we are talking about the 1996 adaptation of The Island of Dr. Moreau. And for that conversation, we are joined by Micah McCaw.
Hello. I'm happy to visit the island and potentially come back a little less man and a little more animal.
And definitely less sane.
Absolutely.
For anyone involved either in the movie itself or the production as a whole, a little less sane is definitely the response.
I actually think that the great thing about this movie is that the trivia is almost more fun than the movie. And like, I was like, wow, there's just so much that happened behind the scenes. And this movie is a train wreck, partially because of all of that bullshit.
Like obviously this movie was always going to be on our list of movies to talk about at some point because it's just such a weird fucking movie. But it's also the kind of movie where you're like, well, the fact that a movie actually was made almost makes this a fifth episode kind of movie because it's just like, holy shit, this thing actually like got into theaters. And like every step of the way, you're like, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And then somehow it made it to theaters. I remember seeing commercials. I remember watching like behind the scenes featurettes on this movie. Like I was excited for this movie when it came out.
Did you see this movie in the theaters?
I didn't see it in theaters, but I did see it shortly after on home video. Because this was 1996, so I was 12. And like I probably could have gotten away with it because they ultimately, I think, did end up with a PG-13 rating. But that doesn't mean that my parents were itching to take me to see it at the time.
Yeah, my parents had no interest in this film, so we did not see this.
I have to say, of all of the things that I'd heard about this movie, the Marlon Brando of it all, the Val Kilmer of it all, bad weather, all of this stuff, the most surprising thing to me was I was not expecting there to be an orgy scene in this movie.
Right.
And I was kind of, I mean, it's not really graphic in any way, but I was sort of dumbfounded. I was already dumbfounded. And then when it got to that point, I was just like, what is going on? This is one of the wildest movies maybe ever.
Yeah. Yeah. So for people not familiar with this property, this is
you really should watch it. It's crazy, people.
I think just for the value of being like, well, that was really weird.
That was an experience for sure.
But this is based on an 1896 novel by H.G. Wells, and is kind of the prototype example of like mad scientists with a bunch of experiments on an island, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
You know, in the way that H.G. Wells is kind of the prototype for a lot of specific types of stories that aren't really of themselves truly groundbreaking in terms of like, well, like War of the Worlds is like, what if the colonizers were not us? Which is, I know, a huge like innovation for the British. And in this case, it's like, well, what? What if the subhuman creatures weren't us just treating real humans as subhuman, but actual animals that we're then converting? And so there's a lot of stuff going on in that book. And what I will say is that it's interesting looking at this movie because the story itself is actually fairly basic when you get down to it, where it's like, all right, we've got a mad scientist off away, an outsider shows up and is forced to observe the workings of the mad scientist. And then the experiments all go awry and everyone has to flee to survive. Like that's the basic idea of it, which is like kind of a bog standard, like sci-fi monster movie kind of trope. And in this case, it's like, here's a whole island of our, beast men who decided to go back to being beasts because we are monsters to them. Like we have done terrible stuff, but man, the actual way it's like put on screen here is just a lot. like the whole thing is just I don't even know what to say. So like I'm kind of flabbergasted.
Honestly, this movie has such a feel of like, it's not even twisty and turny, but it makes your brain feel like you don't even know where to begin. Like if I had to describe this film to someone, even though the concept is really basic, right? It's like super basic. I mean, and we've seen it replicated in like thousands of other monster movies. I mean, you could even argue that somewhat Jurassic Park kind of takes same beats, right? Like experiment goes, it's a wondrous experiment. Although there it's more wondrous, right? But it's giant beasts and it's just the scientist that thinks, we're doing this thing that's amazing, and then everything goes wrong and people have to escape the thing that went wrong, right? Totally basic. We've seen this over and over and over again. But somehow trying to think about a timeline for this, or if I had to make an outline to explain this to a class, I would be like, wait, I forgot. I have to go back. Towards, because like Val Kilmer, like he finds him in the middle of the ocean, but this might have been set up. So I don't know if they shot down the plane, but that's not the point. So anyway, so they find him in the ocean, and then there's like this little pygmy guy, and he plays piano with Marlon Brando, and then and it just like forever. Oh, and then there's Marlon Brando's daughter, and I just feel like my brain was mush after this. Like I would like literally looked at my notes and I was like, they make no sense. Just like this movie.
Yeah, and you describing the plot just now kind of was me going, oh, okay, that was the plot of the movie.
Well, I think one of the biggest flaws of this film is that there's never a why of it all, right? Like having someone who's never read the H.G. Wells version, didn't see like the older film, there's never a reason why explained at all by Dr. Moreau why he decided to do these experiments other than like pure curiosity. Like usually there's like something there. We're used to villains giving us kind of like, especially now, we're used to be like, I wanted to cure my wife, or I wanted to do this, or wanted to do that. Maybe even like the fact that he's got an allergy to the sun. No, there's never anything that is ever fully explained as to why he's conducting these experiments. Like what led him down this path after inventing, as the movie states, Velcro. Seems like a very different science, but sure. Okay.
Well, I mean, that's just a flippant joke at that point, because when you actually like, there's a Easter egg that in Swedish, his Nobel Prize is for genetic experiments.
Yes.
I found out when I was doing research on this, not that I can actually read Swedish. Because I'm not that talented. I am a hack. But so is everyone involved in this movie, because holy shit. So we've mentioned the Marlon Brando of it all. Marlon Brando is a big reason why this movie both happened and also why it is the way it is.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair to say for a man who was already wearing an earpiece being fed his lines. Yeah, I think that's. I think it's fair to say of Marlon
an earpiece
Brando.
You can see in the movie.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, sometimes it's hidden by his Pope outfit, so that's, but yes, you can.
Yeah,
see
it's
it.
And the thing that I was trying to like reconcile with this movie, it's kind of this beautiful poetic thing where you have Marlon Brando being a very famous actor who is only told yes for longer than he's been told no in his life. Okay. I understand that messes with your brain. But on the one hand, you have Apocalypse Now, where he shows up on set. He's the wrong weight. He doesn't agree to do anything that he's asked to do. And Francis Ford Coppola is able to turn that into a masterpiece. And then you have this movie on this side where it's all of the same things from Marlon Brando. And it's what you expected Apocalypse Now to be. So my thesis is this is the bad Apocalypse Now, I guess.
Right. Well, and what's interesting to make that comparison, because Apocalypse Now gets brought up a lot in all the behind the scenes stuff, every article about it. Apparently that was the fact that Moreau is a Kurtz-like figure was appealing to Marlon Brando, which you would think he would try to do it better this time instead.
Yeah.
And we'll get into some of the reasons why in a minute. But in the case of both Apocalypse Now and in this movie, there is a documentary that is arguably more interesting than the actual movie. And in this case, that documentary is Lost Souls, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau, which I watched last night and is also a fever dream.
Yeah. I didn't know it existed till you emailed and said you were watching the doc, and I think I'm going to have to set aside some time this week to watch it.
I will warn you that there's a lot of interviews with Richard Stanley, the original director of this movie. We'll get into that. And he is also a pretty creepy and weird dude. And he has a strange monotone that will haunt your nightmares.
I got to see what else he directed, because I'm not familiar with that name really beyond this.
So the thing is, this movie kind of tanked his career, and then he didn't really come back to directing until the next movie he directed was 23 years later.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, and is that Color Out of Space?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess he directed some short films in the interim, but what went off the reservation on this movie, literally.
Yeah.
I mean, I read in one of the trivia things that there was a rumor that he actually had the makeup artists put him in costume so he could be an extra to watch in the background, after he was fired. He was 4 days in and he was fired from the set. And then he basically just stuck around in costume. Now, that has not been confirmed.
Oh, no, that's the thing. It has been confirmed.
It is confirmed.
It's 100% true. And in fact, they point out which one he is in a bunch of the shots.
They point it out too.
Yeah, no. So in the documentary, because the documentary is recent, ish, it's in the last 20 years as opposed to in the mid 90s. So he actually talks about it where we got. There's so much to talk about. It's hard to even sell just the insanity.
Yeah, but we
of this
definitely
production.
need to talk about this. It's weird.
Fuck Christ. There's so many things. Because so there's this this movie was a cavalcade of fuck ups. From start to finish, everything about it is just oh yeah, that was never gonna work. We have this indie horror director. He had done a bunch of really small but successful, low budget movies that was getting some buzz, and it was all right, let's make the jump to a bigger budget. And then because the property is enough of a name because it's H.G. Wells, the studio took the script that Stanley had written, and they liked that script, and then they tried to attach Roman Polanski to direct. Now that would have been bad. That would have been the wrong choice, just because fuck him.
Yeah.
But in the process of that, they tried to attach Marlon Brando to it, and he wasn't sure about it. Richard Stanley got a meeting and was able to, through some fuckery, get him one-on-one by way of Marlon Brando constantly cranking up the AC so that the exec from the studio that was with them for the meeting fell asleep because she mentioned that was just the thing that happens when it gets too cold. So he convinced Marlon Brando to be yeah, I'll back you on this movie. You sound like a weird dude.
Which is the Marlon Brando of it all. Really.
Exactly. So they were yeah, fuck it. Sure. Why not? And with Marlon Brando attached, the budget ballooned. And so that's the starting point on it. And this is actually where it's this might actually go okay. The budget's getting a little too big for what this director probably was capable of without an infrastructure in place. And I think that the ultimate like, spoiler for my pitch, ultimately they should have put a decent assistant director with him because he had a vision, but he was used to being like on a tiny set where like everyone is doing everything and like it's all hands on deck and everyone has to be passionate about everything. Like when you're on a small production, like you like it's a labor of love. And like if you're on a big production and no one fucking wants to be there, like you need people who can like bark orders and stay organized and do all the things, because like your lead actors aren't doing that for you, which they would on a small production where they're as much, where they have as much skin in the game, you know?
Right.
So they get Marlon Brando on board for this. And at that point, all of a sudden, all these other actors want to come on board because Marlon Brando's attached to it. And like, you know, he's old. He doesn't have much of a career left at this point. I forget if he has. He's
still Marlon Brando. I mean, like,
right, yeah.
He is the Marlon Brando of it all. And he is kind of crazy, but he's Marlon Brando, right? Like, so like Ron Perlman
who wouldn't try and do it,
right? Ron Perlman said he wanted to work on it, like
right.
Val Kilmer also, and even David Thewlis. I always say his name oddly, so sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, sir. Like they all want, like Marlon Brando was this huge draw for them, like, you know, like, oh, we're gonna work on this because this is a living legend, you know, maybe in the twilight of his career, but still.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that is kind of the key thing. So with Brando attached, Bruce Willis becomes attached.
Right.
And he's going to be the lead, the UN explorer who comes in, and the name changes from the book to the movie, and ultimately is played by David Thewlis. So he's attached for that, and then they're like, okay, cool, we've got this really like famous actor here, we've got this other famous actor here, and they get James Woods attached to B. Montgomery, and like, you know what? We spent a good chunk of time on the Hercules episode just saying fuck James Woods. I echo that sentiment.
Uh-huh.
He would have been better than Val Kilmer because fuck, man. Like when we're talking about people being checked out. So here's how
he would have. But I recently watched Vampires, John Carpenter's Vampires,
right?
For the first time, and James Wood does have some good performances in his career. But I mean, even this is around Vampires time. Yikes on the acting there.
You know,
so.
I don't know. I don't know if it would have been a better choice. Val Kilmer is the perfect jerk for this. I'm gonna push back on you, Case. I'm gonna say I actually like his performance in this. I think he was amazing.
You like what made it onto screen, but there's some behind the scenes shit that we'll talk about. Hang on, I'm building it to it because at the moment we haven't gotten to why Val Kilmer is even there.
I know that he's definitely a pain in the ass behind the screen. I know for sure about it. I did not see what they cut, but I think in general they got what they needed for him on screen for this film. And the character was an a-hole, and it was fine. He was fine. Go on, though, because this is an interesting tale.
So we've got a good lineup. We've got Bruce Willis, we've got Marlon Brando, we've got James Woods. Bruce Willis is in the process of getting a divorce from Demi Moore and drops out because of personal issues that are going on with the movie. So all of a sudden, it's like, okay, we no longer have our lead, and they're trying to find a person who can replace him, and this is right after Batman Forever, and they happen to stumble onto Val Kilmer, who it's like, yeah, no, that's a fair enough trade from a concept level of like, yeah, all right, Val Kilmer like swapping in for Bruce Willis, sure, all right, and he wants to work with Brando, sure, okay, cool, let's make that all work. Val Kilmer apparently also getting divorced at this time, but also just kind of a prick, negotiates down to. From his still getting paid the same amount to having to shoot 40% less than what he had initially signed on for.
To be fair, he did learn that he was getting divorced by turning on his TV.
That is also true.
Might have umped the jerk factor there.
I mean, yes. Although you could argue that the jerk factor, yes.
Yeah, you could argue both ways, but go on.
Well, if I may cut in here, I mean, have you both watched the Val documentary?
No.
And are you familiar with it?
I'm not.
Oh, okay. So throughout his entire life, he's been filming everything. And so he like always has a camera with him. And so there's this documentary on Amazon called Val, and they went through and they edited like all the footage. So there's all this crazy behind the scenes at Top Gun and Batman and Island of Dr. Moreau and stuff. But it's funny because, you know, his son narrates it because of his voice issues and whatnot.
Right.
But he writes all the stuff, and so the narration is basically him. And hearing his point of view on what happened was very interesting compared to what maybe is the reality of the situation, because he's presenting it like, I was so excited to work on this movie with Marlon Brando, and then John Frankenheimer wouldn't allow Marlon Brando to be the genius he's supposed to, and so it was a really devastating experience. But then you're saying, which is true, of course, that right from the get-go, he's like, can I work 40% less time and like not be there as much as possible? So I think he's looking at the past with a little rose-colored glasses.
Right, because as you just said, it was John Frankenheimer that he's complaining about, who at the time was not slated to be the director. It was Richard Stanley who wrote the screenplay, who was slated to be the director. So Kilmer's already like playing diva on this whole thing. And then we haven't even got to set yet. So he negotiates down 40%. And as a result, they're locked into him being in the movie. They're locked into him being on the poster, but they can't use him for nearly enough of the enough film time to actually have him be the lead, which is again the part he signed up for. So they then have to they have to move him to the part of Montgomery, which actually pushes out James Woods.
Oh, so he was going to play the Thulis part.
The Thulis
he was
part,
going to be Douglas.
Oh, I didn't catch that. Okay.
Right. So he gets pushed over to the Montgomery role, which is kind of a bit part. It's Val Kilmer, so he's memorable in that, and he's on the poster and he's in all the trailers because he's Val Kilmer. But like it's sort of the henchman role in this one, or like it's kind of like Nedry in Jurassic Park, which, you know, like Sam, thank you for bringing that one up, because that's like a modern like what hath science wrought kind of property that it's directly descended from the Island of Dr. Moreau. So we move him over to this sort of the dragon character for Moreau, and then all of a sudden we have a big gaping hole where the lead's supposed to be. So initially it was going to be Rob Morrow, who got to set, and they got in the first 3 days of filming, and he cried he called the producers crying, and asking to be taken off the shoot and and out of his contract because it was going so poorly. Like already 3 days in, he complains about, and this is kind of the thing again, it's all of a sudden a big budget movie. Like this is 1996. So like a $40 million budget's actually pretty big. Working on this movie with, you know, lots of special effects, lots of pyrotechnics, lots of stuff going on. When you're on a small indie movie, you can be like, all right, no, you run over this way. We're gonna get a couple angles. We'll cut it together to look like something good. And in this case, he was terrified of getting hurt because like there's explosions going on. I'm actually surprised to not see more stuff about injuries on set. Because like it sounds like it was a complete clusterfuck those couple days that Richard Stanley was there. And some of that is him being a novice, but some of that is just like coming at it with not a strong enough crew to really kind of to guide the whole thing. Because when you're dealing with something that is that big, you need to have a lot of people who can take charge of the very particular departments that they're in. Anyway, so Morrow leaves the shoot. At around this time is when Richard Stanley gets fired. Production has to halt completely. They have to get a new lead. They have to get a new director. And everyone who is there in Australia filming is just waiting. The fortunately the special effects team is actually still going. Like they're developing more and more characters because they were already under time constraints anyway, because there's a lot of like really elaborate stuff that they're trying to build, which is why when people talk about this movie in a positive light, they are exclusively talking about the Sam Winston special effects, because there's a lot of really cool like puppetry going on, a lot of really cool makeup going on, lots of really cool stuff. Anyway, eventually they get John Frankenheimer to come on, and I forget the name of his AD that he works with all the time, but his AD is on the documentary because Frankenheimer passed away by the time they made the documentary. And he is fucking hilarious. He has no time for anyone's bullshit. Like they're able to like somewhat wrangle everyone because they have to get this movie made. Like there are a lot of people. So probably especially because they had this break there where everyone was still getting paid because they were being paid to be down in Australia with like these fairly extensive per diems. And they're kind of in the middle of nowhere. The shoot is an hour away from where the hotel that everyone is staying at is. And which means that every day it's a 2-hour commute for everyone, just to get deep enough into the jungle so that they can get a good angle at this mountain that they want to have like focused in every shot. Although it's also at like the epicenter of like this terrible rainstorm, like region that is like constantly being hit. And so most days you can't actually see it. They were like, oh, we got like 3 shots where we could actually see the mountain because there was so many clouds and mist in the way. So this entire location.
When you mentioned the mountain, I had no idea what you were talking about.
Exactly.
I did not
Exactly. They could barely get it. They were like, oh, it's going to be so symbolic and creepy and cool. It'll look like a volcano kind of thing. Nope. They couldn't get any of that in. The first AD was like, yeah, no, my first thing when I was assigned to this is I brought up a weather map to look at it. And I saw like everything, like if it was red, it was fairly dry. And if as it gets in more and more blue colors, it gets wetter and wetter. And then there's this like little purple sliver that was supposed to be like the craziest rainfall that Australia was expected to get that year. And that was exactly where our set was. And it's like, oh man, like that's just going to be rough right there.
Yeah.
And I should also note that a lot of cast didn't like the changeover. Fairuza Balk, who had been signed on to play the doctor's daughter, this like cat lady character who's not in the books but has been in like subsequent adaptations, so they wanted to keep that kind of a character, tried to quit, and by way of forcing this one guy who at the time was acting as a limo driver for the crew or for the cast and crew to drive her to Sydney, which was on the other side of the continent.
Very cool.
And when they got there, the producers got her on the phone and said, like, or rather, her agent got her on the phone and was like, your career will be completely destroyed. Like, they will say that you walked off of a multi-million-dollar set and you will never be able to get work again. You have to go back. So she had to turn around and go right back. Fucking like, wild fucking shoot.
Yeah.
But they get Frankenheimer on there, and this is when Brando tries to go full Brando. Like, so where to start with some of this weird shit that he's pulling on this one?
I mean, first of all, when David Thewlis shows up, he tells him, because like, you know, he's a replacement. He tells him to turn back, that this is not the film he wants to be on because it's cursed. So he's very dramatic.
He says that to Thewlis?
Yes,
Wait, did you say Thewlis?
Yeah, I always change his name. Thewlis.
Thewlis. It's Thewlis.
Oh, okay.
It's Thewlis.
You know, Casey Thewlis. Thewlis. He tells him that, like, the first day he's on set. So, like, David was saying he was really excited because he's meeting Marlon Brando. And, of course, you know, he's a replacement, right? So he walks on and Marlon Brando says to him, David, this isn't the film for you. This film is cursed.
Yeah.
You should walk away.
Well, and actually, sorry, I forgot to mention this part. So before they were able to get Brando on set, his daughter, Marlon Brando's daughter, committed suicide, and so there was massive delays in him actually even arriving. Which, like, I don't want to downplay it. Like, yes, that was an intensely sad thing that's going on, but just more of this fucking thing being cursed. Apparently, while all the production team or while the special effects team were doing like all these like crazy, awesome makeup things that they were doing in the break while the movie was shut down, all the cast and crew were just having orgies and like just doing shitloads of drugs. And like the hotel became just this giant party place. Like one of the guys who was just on I think he was an extra, was like, yeah, our per diems were crazy high. I bought this like elaborate, like radio controlled car that, you know, those like, those car track stuff that like used to be really popular in the 90s. And like, I guess probably are still like for enthusiasts, but like it was this hugely elaborate thing that was just like set up in his hotel room, and they have like all these behind the scenes documentary people like filming stuff. So like there's just shots of these like big party spaces. All the extras like, yeah, I did so many drugs during this whole thing. It became just a giant like drug filled fuck fest behind the scenes, and the movie is a giant drug filled fuck fest on top of that. So like there's a lot of like self reinforcing elements going on. So. Yeah.
You peel back one layer and there's 5 more.
Right. Well, so I mentioned the guy who was the limo driver. This guy is like really interesting because he had 3 different jobs because he kept getting fired from different ones, and that was job number 2. Job number 1, I think, was I forget specifically. I think he was just like a PA. Job 2 was limo. Job 3, I think he he came back on as PA. But while he was out in the Australian countryside, he came across a farmer who mentioned that they had a guy who was like staying on his land and complaining about how Val Kilmer ruined his life. At which point he was like, "Oh, I wonder," and like went over to this farm and found out that it was in fact Richard Stanley, who he then brought back to set. And like they were like, "Oh, he didn't really like sneak in. I just drove through the gates with him." On there, but so that he wouldn't be identified, and because there was a restraining order preventing him from coming within 40 meters of the actual shoot, Richard Stanley had to go in costume, and so they got the costume department to give him a bulldog suit to wear. And apparently the first AD was able to see that there was something wrong, because everyone else, every time a shoot was over, or like every time they would call cut, everyone would take off their mask, go get some water and everything. And this one fucking guy wouldn't do it.
No way. I'm trying to look up pictures right now because I'm sure. Oh, I'm not seeing it yet. Oh, is it this like a weird like wildebeest looking one?
It's a bulldog mask, but they all look really weird, so it's hard to.
Stanley Island of Dr. Moreau movie. I don't know how to search this to find the correct.
So when I type in Richard Stanley bulldog, there's a picture from the documentary where he's actually holding the mask that he wore on set, but it's like yellowed and like a lot of like the paint has like chipped off.
Oh, yeah, that is very bulldog-y. Maybe he's just in the background or something like.
Yeah,
that.
I mean, he's not he is a background character. In the documentary they show like a close up where it's like, okay, and this one is the bulldog that we're talking about, which I find just amazing.
It's crazy, So I know the whole premise of your show, of course, is to see if we can reasonably come up with some solution to making the movie better. And it seems like we're all kind of in agreement that there isn't like necessarily a better version of this movie.
I don't know if there is.
But if I could be crazy, I as crazy as this movie is, there's a part of me that dreams of an alternate reality where probably New Line Cinema goes bankrupt and we don't get Lord of the Rings. So I don't wish for that world, but they go bankrupt and Richard Stanley directs the whole movie. That would be like the most insane movie. It would probably top this, I would imagine. But maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, we've come across this before where a movie is infamously bad, and as a result, it's better known than if it was just mediocre.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, which I think this movie ultimately kind of is. Like, we can talk about it, but like, again, the what hath science wrought kind of genre has been very well trodden since the novel was originally written. There have been lots of there both have been lots of adaptations of the novel and lots of knockoff adaptations of the novel. And then you get into stuff that takes that same idea and builds upon it in new ways. So we're kind of stuck in a situation of like, how do you make this still relevant when it was being written about 1890s British imperialism and the way that all sort of like plays out, and also like fears of vivisections and fears of like this new theory of evolution and all these things that were going on at a very particular time that by the time we get to the 1990s is old hat.
Sure. Yeah.
I think Brando's clear take on it, because he decided to dress as the Pope because he felt that this person was blaspheming against life, is probably where he was standing. It's a take on religion for him.
Yeah, you get into this whole God thing, but actually, so Brando has a whole bunch of weird notes, and like Brando is known for weird notes. On the original Superman, he wanted to, what was it, a suitcase he wanted to be presented as, like, the Jor-El hologram would be like him appearing as weird shit and just his voice coming through. So like, it's not surprising.
No, this is not surprising coming from Brando at all.
But so like a couple of the things, like there's all these shots where he insisted on wearing this like big tube hat piece that they pour ice into, where he's like, "Oh, it's because I'm so hot."
Thing.
Right. Well,
Wild.
when he explained it, no one had any idea what the fuck he was talking about. So they had to like custom make it because it was like this idea for this character. Oh, he's always hot and so forth. And part of the reason why he was like pushing this idea was he wanted it to be revealed like later in the movie. The hat comes off and it reveals that he's actually an evolved dolphin.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
right.
that makes total sense.
That's a pretty straight line.
I mean, honestly, it really fits with the movie. I don't know why you're saying like it's like hilarious because honestly, if it had happened, I'd be like, oh, that's why he's working on the serum. He was experimenting on himself first. It actually might have answered some things for me as to the why, because I think the biggest issue I have with this movie is I don't understand why this island exists. I mean, I guess I understand why the island exists because of his experiments, but I don't understand what led him down the road to these experiments. Like, what was it that was like, what was the first time he was just like, I'm going to mix a cat and a person together, and that's going to be the best thing, like, because I love cats and I sort of like people. People would only get better as cats. Is that his thinking? I don't know. We never get that moment, really.
I mean, I think it's that once you get this, like, you start, however innocuous, like this approach to like breaking what the laws of science or the laws of God were, it becomes infectious and you can't stop. Like, you keep going further and further. So like wherever his early phases, because in the book it's all surgery. It's not genetic manipulation because they had no concept of that.
Right.
He would take animals and then like reconfigure their skeletons and like and move their organs around so that they could walk on two legs and have vocal cords that he would reshape through surgery so that they could make words and all this like terrible stuff. Like, in the book, the reason he's ousted from like London scientific communities is that like a dog that he was working on gets loose, and that dog was flayed. Like, he had removed all of the actual canine dermis, and it had gotten out and was like running around London as this like bloody mess. And like this like horrible thing that he's working on like pushes like the genteel scientific community to like oust him. And he's like, no, I'm going to keep working on this because he's so infected with this idea that he can really create something new. And he's still a mysterious figure in the book as well. Like, he's like, it's a first person perspective from like Edward Pendrick, I think is the
Pendrick,
yeah.
But I feel like I didn't really get that in this telling, right? Like,
well, no, because he wouldn't fucking come to set most of the time. The reason why he insisted on having the white makeup on is so that and sunglasses with heavy covering was so that a stand-in could be used for most of the shots.
Fair enough. I mean, I just feel like this is we just needed a little more of that. I mean, let me tell you, I wouldn't take out the piano scene. I loved it. I thought it was wonderful.
I also love that shot.
I actually really, really adore it, and I do think it's a little weird that Marlon Brando became so obsessed with the actor who Nelson de la Rosa, who played that character. He became obsessed with him and wanted to do all his scenes with him. Like, he wanted him in everything. But that's a Brando thing, right? That's the Brando of it all. He has moments like that where he just loves things.
Thank you for bringing him up, because he's so. All right, so outside of honestly, probably the thing that this movie is best known for, beyond just like, oh, it was a Marlon Brando movie where he's weird with Val Kilmer, is honestly Nelson de la Rosa. He is the smallest recorded person, I think ever, but certainly at the time when he was alive, he was the smallest person in the world. He was 2 feet tall.
I think there was actually a smaller person, because we were looking this up while we were watching the movie, and there was a smaller person at the time.
At the same time?
I believe so, or maybe now there's been.
It doesn't matter. We're talking about
person.
a 2 foot tall person. Like, this is like a 2 foot tall adult. Like, this is a truly insane fluke of nature. And he was this Dominican celebrity who had become just famous as this sort of like oddity. Like, he would go on like talent shows and have interviews and all that. And Brando caught wind of him and insisted him on being in the movie. So they reached out to this guy completely. It was not part of anyone's idea for this movie beforehand. It was just like, oh, wouldn't that be crazy if we got this tiny little person? And he became obsessed with him and effectively changed the actual cast importance to make this character Magi, who is his like little like clone of himself, the focus character for his like best, like his favorite son kind of character.
And you know what?
Honestly,
I'm giving him MVP of the movie performance wise. I think he is locked in, and I think he's the best performance in the movie.
He should have won an Oscar. Best supporting character. Like it was amazing. That piano scene was so great. The tiny piano on top of the bigger piano, them playing together sounded so perfect. I don't even care if it was all acting. It was wonderful.
His strange tail in that one scene was very disturbing in a way that was like that's the kind of stuff that I think this movie should lean more into.
I will say I was a little taken aback and kind of slightly offended by Edward's reaction to Dr. Moreau's children in the house. Like, I was like, Edward, you were being very rude right now. He was like, look at these people. I'm like, damn, guy, they are right there. Like, they are right there. Like, you can, like, I felt like that scene very much like I was just like, ooh, I am not feeling that at all. Like, I feel like he really... There are nicer ways that David could have said, like, did you experiment on all of them? That's even mean. I don't know. There's just no nice way to say those people are hideous. Like, it was just, what is wrong with you?
Well, I'll start with noting that I think that David Thewlis was not a great choice for the character that they were trying to present. Like, you could have made him work, but I think that he does not work as a romantic lead. He comes off as so, like he comes off as like such a sex pest when he first approaches Fairuza Balk. He's like, oh, I'm just here. And like, he's like leaning up and trying to be like, kind of like hot. She's clearly supposed to be young. She's clearly supposed to be naive. He is extremely creepy. He just like is watching her dance and like, kind of just like, creeps up on her and never like stops being creepy in this movie. Like
very 1996.
Right. Oh my God. Yes.
Yeah.
Treating of women for sure. Unfortunately.
So he's not necessarily a great lead either in this capacity. And to be fair, he's at best their fourth choice.
Well, and you know, I'm sure they say this in the doc, but I believe he had to improvise like most of the scenes that we see.
Well, there are lots of constant rewrites, and then because Brando wouldn't learn his script, and I don't think Kilmer either learned his lines at any point. Like, he probably had a little bit more. Like Brando, we talked about the earpiece, which was also picking up police radios periodically, and he wouldn't distinguish between what the types of things he was hearing was. So he would just sometimes like report about a robbery, and he would like mutter it out.
Yeah,
because it was Marlon Brando.
It was actually said that he actually once said, "There's a robbery at Woolworths happening right now," and David was like, what? Because it just threw him right off. Yes.
Could you imagine how devastating that would be, being David, and you're working with Marlon Brando, and then he is telling you about a robbery through an earpiece?
Yeah.
And, you know, you're David. You're not as big of an actor as he is now. I mean, I think he's, you know, close to like A-list, if not A-list at this point in his career, like current day. But back then, this has got to be like a huge break for him, is what he's thinking. And then he gets to the set, and he's like, oh, man, this might set me back 10 years.
I mean, it probably did, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen him in anything this young. This is like the youngest I've seen him. And then it's probably Harry Potter, like 10 years later, that I start seeing him again.
Yeah, pretty much. He was oftentimes a that guy actor. Like, he was certainly, he's in stuff, and like I constantly will see a movie from like the 90s where I'm like, oh shit, including this one where I'm like, oh, I totally forgot that David Thewlis was the lead. And by forgot, I mean like I didn't really know who he was when I saw this movie initially, and hadn't rewatched it since like 1998. So, so, you know, like, yeah, I would say it slowed his career a bit, being in this like infamous train wreck of a movie.
Of course, maybe this gives him him and his team the ability to go, hey, don't go for lead, be a great character actor, because now he's like one of our most cherished, wonderful character actor, and he just kills it every time. I remember reading he's the one who didn't go to like see it at all, right? Like, he didn't go to the premiere because he thought his experience was so terrible that he never showed up.
Supposedly he's never watched it.
Like, he should.
Like, he was so traumatized apparently by being on this set and experiencing this film that he couldn't bring himself to actually watch this film.
Yeah, that all checks out. I mean, because, you know, like I said, the story is fairly basic. You just need a viewpoint character, and somehow he's not even the best choice for that viewpoint character here. Like, can you imagine the world where we got Bruce Willis? And like, he's not really a realistic candidate for this part anymore, because we know that he dropped out for personal reasons that would have happened no matter what. So like, what can we say? But can you imagine a Bruce Willis led The Island of Dr. Moreau?
It would have definitely been different.
Yeah. Oh, I just think what's fascinating, you know, I was looking through Letterboxd, the people that I follow who had seen this movie, and there's the film critic Matt Singer, who I just always like to cite the people I'm talking about. And he mentions how like Brando is so bad for this movie, but imagining someone else playing it, it would probably be a little less fun to watch. And I kind of feel like that's the whole cast of this movie, where it is like there's a better version of this movie with a different cast, but it is probably like you're saying, it's like I almost like that the movie's so bad, then it's just kind of mediocre and boring.
Well, and also like I agree with you on some level, because I feel like, yes, behind the scenes there's the Brando of it all. And it's not like Brando is like, you know, himself when he was older. But there is something about him being a mad scientist, about being this person who's such a narcissist that he would like run to a deserted island to create cat people and animal people and experiment on them and be called father. And like, it just kind of fits. Like, I understand wanting to cast him. Like, I get it. Like, I understand when the casting director was like, oh, you know who we should get? Marlon Brando. Oh, that would be perfect. And everyone calls him father. I'm like, yes. Oh my God, it'd be amazing. Because there's just something about the way that he is that you almost feel like he shouldn't have to actually do that much heavy lifting. Actually, he doesn't have to do that much heavy lifting to make this character real. I mean, like, is this movie a train wreck because Marlon Brando was in it? Yes. But is this a movie because Marlon Brando was in it? Yes.
Yeah.
I would argue that his performance is spot on. Is it weird? Yes, it should be weird. Is it incoherent at times? Yes, that's okay. His person doesn't have to be coherent. The rest of the cast just had to pick up where he left off, and we would have had a slightly better movie. Because the thing is, it's just like, who else would we have casted for this very eccentric, weird guy that has all of this? I don't know, man. I don't know if anyone at that time would have been as wonderful.
So I will say that the original designs, like the storyboards when they were working on it and like developing it, that Stanley was putting out there, had this sort of like Jesus type figure for Dr. Moreau, like it, very much so, like long beard. He's messianic to everyone. He's and actively a doctor. So like they had all these images. There was this description of the plot being like a Stations of the Cross type situation, although I think that they are not as familiar with what the Stations of the Cross are, because it was like, oh, it will start with birth, and it's like, no, that's not right. But,
yeah.
but it was going to start with like a shot of him when Thulis like goes into the operating room and they see that one goat lady, I think I forget specifically what kind of hybrid, but like, she's got
It's goat-like because
she's
got the weird hooved feet.
Yeah. So she gives birth, and that was supposed to have a shot of like of Moreau like holding the baby and turning and having like the operating lights behind him, creating this like halo behind him. Was like one of the storyboards. That'd have been
pretty cool.
Yeah. There's some really cool like shots that they put in there, and like also we should note that the movie was intended initially to be an R-rated movie with way more orgies going on throughout it all, because they're all just like rutting animals that are constantly on drugs, so that to keep them pacified. So like there was supposed to be a lot more like sexual depravity, and like it was cut both because they wanted it to get to more audience members, and also because like it's bad. Like there was a lot more like assault and like just terrible shit going on. It wasn't like all just like, oh, free love fun. Like so it was supposed to be a bit more violent and creepy and gory and
but maybe not in like we're exploring the you know what this means kind of way, just more in a flippant way. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, just more like it's there. Like it's happening.
Okay.
The animal part of them can't hold back, and so it's much more aggressive and all that, like stuff that probably is good to cut, although we still get enough that it's still fairly disturbing. But I do think having a more active actor on set for the part would have allowed some of those scenes to actually occur. That we even after Stanley's gone to like actually sell this active participant, which he's not. Like because Brando doesn't want to come out of his trailer ever.
It's hot.
And it is hot, but there's also this recurring like thing about how he and Val Kilmer are both like play this game of chicken throughout, where they refuse to come to set before the other one because like they're competing about who has the biggest dick or who's the biggest celebrity right here, and as a result, they neither of them are playing ball for anything, and so like as few scenes as possible that can involve them are shot as that's what they do. Like they just don't want either one in any given scene, even though one is the main person on the island, the other person is sort of his right-hand man.
So wild. And again, like referencing that Val doc, he kind of presents it like this was my opportunity to work with Brando. And I know that's what everyone thought. But then when you hear the reality of it, it seems like right from the get-go, Val maybe wasn't as interested in that as 20 years later, he looks back and he's like, wow, that was my chance to work with Brando, I'm
sure he was at the time, and then they got to it and he was just like, well, no, I'm a star. But I would bet you that Brando's the one who started it. Like it doesn't matter
probably.
Though, because they both were being divas this whole time. And
Brando made people hold cue cards for him during Superman. So like he's got a track record.
There's this kind of haunting moment in the Val doc where, well, first of all, he gets in a fight with Frankenheimer, who is just like, please turn off your camera. You keep filming everything that we're doing. And Val is like, I am in an emotional state. I'm in an emotional state. I'm in an emotional state. I want to keep this camera on because you say you're going to leave the set. So that's kind of wild. But then he walks around the set, and it's in night, and you see Marlon Brando. They're not filming. And he's on the hammock that I think dies in the movie. But he's in that hammock, and Val walks up to him, and he just is like very flippantly going, hey, what's your earliest childhood memory? And he's filming him, and then Brando's smoking this huge stogie, and he is not responding to him at all. And then he just says, give me a little push. Give me a little push. And then Val Kilmer pushes him on the hammock, and he starts swinging, and he goes, that's good. That's good. And it's kind of a haunting portrait of a man. I mean, it's a good reminder that maybe fame is not really good. Yeah. I think it does a lot of bad things to people.
Yep. Yeah, and this is a movie where like being adored by your fans or subjects or creations,
by the things you created,
can go to your head. And so in that sense, like, Brando is an interesting choice here. Like the Kurtz style take
when you
on Moreau.
lose control.
Right. And like, that's interesting. I like that. I just wish he could have been more of an active participant in it all. And then the way that Montgomery kind of descends into the same sort of role is also kind of insane. It happens really fast because it just can't shoot scenes with him like going nuts either. But it does lead to some of the cringy parts of this movie. Like, did either of you get like a real like house slave versus field slave kind of vibe with like the children of Dr. Moreau versus like the broader like my children, like the tacticality of the animals.
Yeah, I actually at one point remember, especially when they were like sitting down to dinner, and I was like, oh, this feels really uncomfortable. Like I get it, but it feels really, really uncomfortable because everyone on this island are his children. But only these that look the most normal-ish or the most human-ish are here in this house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then particularly like the speech patterns for some of them. And in particular, I'm thinking of Azazlo, which is played by Tamora Morrison, who people would know as Boba Fett or Jango Fett or, all the Aquaman's dad.
The Fetts.
All of the clone soldiers. Like wonderful like moment of just like, oh shit, yeah, he goes on for like cool stuff.
He's always a treat.
Yeah.
Yes, but fuck that character though, because he is like, oh my god, his entire job is to be the hound that like chases down and like kills anyone who like defects from the island of Dr. Moreau. Which is terrible. And then he's the turncoat later who
Yeah.
It's again, this is the big example of the like that the houseboy versus like field boy, and I'm like, oh god, I don't like that at all here. And his speech pattern echoes that as well, because he says master, not father.
He does say master a lot. And like, you know, he also, like, everyone else, like you know, that they can have like a little bit of a broken kind of syntax with their speech or like that kind of thing, but his accent is just very clear and very proper, and always like master, thank you. Oh, I like a hunt. And it's very uncomfortable. It's very cringe. It's very like, ugh. And Val Kilmer is like, oh yeah, you like to hunt, right? Like, he just totally encourages the worst parts of him. Very, very uncomfortable.
Val Kilmer in this movie, it truly, because I think John Frankenheimer, you know, from all that we know about the production of this movie, he was like, I'm a hired gun. I am going to deliver a product that can be released in theaters. That is all I care about. And to some degree, I kind of think he's taking the right approach, because I don't know if there's a way to wrangle this movie in. So it's kind of like, just get the job done, get it released, and then New Line can, again, start working on Lord of the Rings, and everything will be fine again for New Line. But it feels like in all of the scenes that Val Kilmer is in, he is actively like, all right, let's see if you can edit this into the movie, John Frankenheimer. Watch this. I'm going to put part of a radio on my head and pop up out of a window and go, hey, you'd need this for your radio. And they're like, can we do it again maybe without that? And he's like, no, that was my take. Sorry.
I have to say that maybe halfway through the movie, there's a moment where like he pops up and he's like in a lab, and I was like, oh right, he's a doctor, because like I forgot that he was also a doctor, that he is like someone who works with Dr. Moreau, that he's like part of these experiments, that he has like a degree to do experiments, because he just comes off so much like a hired gun, like the person who just like basically like watches the compound, like, and like you know, like, oh my god, like an overseer. Ugh. And
Yep.
And so like that's what he comes off as, and I forgot that like he's also like a true believer who is like a scientist too, that came here with a degree to help Dr. Moreau with his crazy experiments. Like he's like a kindred spirit. You don't get that at all. Like, and I was like, oh yeah, he's got a degree. He's not just the guy who shoots stuff, but for most of the movie, he's just the guy that shoots stuff.
Well, from what they edit to this movie, I do actually think you could edit out Val Kilmer, and it wouldn't really change any element of the movie, except for him getting to the island.
But even then, like,
does nothing.
Like, he's caught at sea. It could have, like, I guess him walking onto the island itself, because Val Kilmer is in all those shots, you couldn't really cut out. But like story wise, you certainly could cut him out. Like he does almost nothing, and like all the boat stuff, like before they arrive at the island, you could easily cut, because it was just like he was lost at sea. Oh, they found, and like next thing I know, I was on the shores. They had dropped me off there, or something to that effect. Like could have made that work if not. If they didn't have Kilmer. And that's where it's like weird. Like he just negotiated himself out of the movie effectively. And if you only care about money and your face being on the poster, that's cool. But if you care about like a potential performance, like, or a stepping stone in your career of like having a hit, which, you know, obviously by the time they're really in production, no one thought it was going to be like, oh yeah, this is going to be a huge work for us. Like, but there's no reason to think that beforehand. And, you know, other movies have been huge successes that people at the time thought were going to be a giant train wreck. I'm looking at you, Star Wars. Like,
Star Wars waves back. Hi, buy some action figures.
Like Harrison Ford was pretty convinced that was going to tank his career, but he just needed the money. And like, it didn't. It did really good for him. But like, he had no assurance at the time, because it looked like just a weird, silly movie. And looking at this movie, you could imagine someone convincing themselves that this might be a big stepping stone for their career.
You're in a movie with Marlon Brando, and then you get on set, And Marlon Brando has an earpiece in his head and is wearing ice on his head from a plastic hat that he had specially commissioned. And then you realize, yeah.
Well, and also you start filming the scenes, and then all of a sudden characters who have lines are suddenly no longer being given those lines, and they're being moved around. Like, I mean, we haven't talked about Marco Hofschneider, who plays another one of the Doctor's sons, whose entire part was shifted, was basically ousted because he was supposed to be the favored son / assistant. And in creating the Mini-Me character, who, was the inspiration for Mini-Me literally in Austin Powers. Like they moved this part from being in a lot of stuff with Brando to being like the bare minimum number of scenes that you could have for him.
Yeah.
So like all these actors were being signed on for roles that, because of just the diva-ness of Brando and Kilmer, are being like shifted around or downsized or whatever into basically oblivion.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting too, because going back to it, you can tell that Kilmer's role is diminished because there are things in the text that almost make you feel as if he's like the driving force in some of the things that are breaking down on the island. But then it stops short of out and out accusing him and also like even explaining why that would be his motivation. Like, so there's just like a couple of moments where it was like, oh wait, was it him? And then like there was nothing. Like, and I was like, oh, never mind. It's fine. Whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. It, so I just think that it's like really interesting because there could have been more there, like even a rivalry or something. And it's just that the dynamic between father and him is a lot less interesting. I mean, you've got these two scientists that went to an island for whatever reason to pursue whatever extent in science. And one is called the father and rules everything. And the other is just an assistant and not even like a favorite son. And that dynamic would have been more interesting and somewhere to explore. But that's not there. This is, I don't know. I think that the script presents a lot of stuff, but then there's like a lot of ideas, but it's never really fleshed out fully, other than a lot of really great costumes and, Ron Perlman as another monster, like what it's not a lot going for it.
Yeah. Oh God. All right. So let's mention Ron Perlman because I fucking love him in this movie. Like, I love him in just about everything, but like, I really like him in this movie as this like law sayer to all of them. Like, he's just giving a really good performance. Like every time he's on screen talking, I'm like, oh yeah, I believe that this movie could be good.
Yeah.
He does a really good job of that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he is. There's two really good performances in this, and it's I forget the character name, so I'll say Mini-Me, but not as a
Nelson de la
not as a
Rosa.
slang or anything.
Yeah. Nelson de la Rosa.
And de la Rosa. Yes.
Magi or Magi, I think. It's with a J, but I'm not sure if it's
I think he says Magi.
Yeah, and Ron Perlman. Those are the two good performances. And of course the CG rats, they really bring this thing home.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, no, Ron Perlman adds something that's really lovely to this film, which is like this element of like, because the one thing that this film does set up that it doesn't do well about anything is setting up this like kind of civil war within the creatures that Dr. Moreau has created, right? And so Ron Perlman is this kind of like a priest-like figure in it, and he's a leader, but he follows the father anyway, right? So it's just like it's his job to follow the law of the father, right? So it's his job as a priest to have faith in the rules that are set for them, in their hybrid. We have to learn to walk on two legs, not on four, kind of thing. Don't give in to those temptations, like the father tells us. And so it's very interesting because then you have him and he's like this calming force while there's like these other animals on the island, like hyena, who are going crazy with the question of like, why am I? Who am I? And just like dealing with their own personal like pain of not understanding where they actually fit in the grand scheme of things, which is actually it's actually like a nice point, right? Because I think like good sci-fi always has parallels to actual human feelings, and this is something that people feel, right? This is a real thing. It gets lost, But Ron Perlman's there to like give us that sage wisdom at the end and kind of be that counterbalance to those characters. And that's why his performance, I mean, he always gives a good performance, but it anchors the movie, even though the movie is just, it doesn't even have a rudder, to be honest, but it keeps it. but at least at the end, you feel like, oh, there was kind of a message. Thank you. We're going to accept who we are. No more outside interference. We'll deal with our own. And it's like, okay, cool. Thanks, Ron Perlman. Thanks for anchoring this.
Yeah, that line at the end for him where he says, maybe 4 is better. Like it almost actually like puts a nice bow on this movie. Like you almost get there with this like reverse Animal Farm moment where it's like, oh yeah, well, no, society was going to make us worse. Or maybe it's the same point, but they end at the opposite end where like now they're descending into 4-legged form. And I think that's cool because like the fundamental conversation about the island of Dr. Moreau is like, well, nature versus nurture. Like it's their animal instincts like pushing back on us trying to impose a civilized structure upon these things that we're not ready for them. And that's why it's important that the animals are all originally animals that have been changed as opposed to while we do see one being born, they're not really genetic experiments. Like, or rather, they're not genetic experiments that are grown and then like children that rise up. Like in the book, especially, and in the movie, it still is that way. Although we don't know enough about the process for it all. They're always animals that have been turned into sapiens. They are always mutated animals as opposed to a hybrid animal human or an animal that's been genetically modified to rise up in that way. That's why they all have the danger of reverting. It's not just that they were like some sort of test tube baby grown up and then they are going to like start turning back. They're all animals first, then has this artifice of humanity like thrust upon them. And they're being told that it's a good thing. And that all their base instincts that they're fighting against is a bad thing that they should reject. And then ultimately they all give in to their baser animal needs and become more animalistic and devolve back into that form. And it's nice that we have like an attempt at trying to like be like, well, but that's because that's what they actually are.
Yeah. Like we're going to embrace what we are. Maybe 4 is better than 2. I thought that was, I thought it was nice because it was just like, okay, like, but again, anchor, but no rudder. Like this movie goes nowhere.
Yeah.
But Ron Perlman sticks the landing on that, at least in my humble opinion.
Yeah. No, I think you're right.
Yeah, and also I do actually want to shout out the performance of the hyena character, which was Daniel Rigney. Pardon me. I have an objection that this is the 90s. We're aware that hyenas are a matriarchal society and that it, by all rights, should have been a female character. We'll come back to that one later. But I actually thought that the structure of the character, I thought he looked great. I thought that the way that they integrated like hyena kind of sounds into his dialogue was really good. I thought that the fact that he's not the initial antagonist, that it's the leopard character who is like also surprising cast here where it's Mark Dacascos who who is like a stuntman and action actor. He was in Double Dragon. He's been in a bunch of stuff since then. But Double Dragon's the last time we talked about him on this show. But just like, oh, it's fun. The cool actors in this all. But that leopard role is the one that was the initial one that's like violating the rules and eating meat and like and running on all 4 and appreciating the animal instincts. And that hyena is galvanized by the death of his friend to start exploring that. In fact, like he finds out about the implants by way of inspecting the body of his friend and weeping openly. You know, like I think that there is a lot of like relatable pathos for this villain who then leads this rebellion against what he sees as a monster who is just torturing them for fun.
Yeah, someone who's controlling them. And I think also it's lovely because he asks him, you know, what am I? You know, during the confrontation in Marlon Brando's living room, where actually I actually like when he plays the animals, like the music and does the
Yes,
whole
I was about
thing.
to say.
I thought that was a great scene. Like, I think it's such a great scene. He plays dissonance and they hate it. And then he plays like Gershwin and they all like love it. And they're like, oh, that's really nice. But he uses a stalling method to like go back to then again get the device that allows him to shock them and control them. And that's when Hyena leads everyone else to basically, hurt the father and kill the father. And I think that like it's because he's betrayed. So like you feel for Hyena, right? Like you feel because it's like he was asking a question, a real question. Like why, what am I? What did you do to me? Why, father? And the father just turned around to control, not to answer. I think that was actually really good.
That element I thought was really good, especially because it then ties back to the earlier time where we're seeing Moreau and Magi like playing the piano on top of each other. Like it was like, oh, that made that scene, which I thought was like a beautiful shot, with like this nice like camera track that looked really good and was cool. It then comes back here, and I thought that was nice. I thought the confrontation with Moreau was a solid point, and the fact that Moreau's response to them, once the second he can like get a hold of the like little buzzer that they use to activate the implants is to try to shock them into submission again, shows that he is not a true father to them. He is merely an experimenter who wants to use them and like has conditioned them to think that that pain is an aspect of love. And these are all really good elements here. Like there's so many things you can talk about in this movie that are like, this is good. It should be good. And then the actual finished product is not.
Well, it's just like these themes and stuff are good, but it lacks that special sauce, you know? It just doesn't have that, because even the scene, maybe the best scene of the movie, and I did not think it was it just wasn't a good scene because of the buildup wasn't good. And I think even though it's like the best that we get, I still don't think Brando's very plugged into that scene, you know? And it's like, that's the best we got. It's almost like we're giving the movie too much credit.
Right, exactly. Well, this movie's a mess from start to finish. Like it opens and ends with a voiceover that doesn't continue throughout the rest of the movie, and is just like either it should have been there the whole time or it shouldn't have been there at all. Like pick one, but don't use it just as a bookend. And I know you're doing that because you don't have the footage to really like put it all together. Like, cool, I get that as well. You know, we like Val Kilmer has some great fucking one-liners. Like when he's like, more of a vet, like really good line. Later when it's less good, but it like I get what they're trying to do. Where it's like, yeah, she's a pussycat. Like when talking about about Fairuza Balk, like at least they're like trying to be cheeky and fun in all those spots.
Although I did go ew.
Well, yes, it's specifically there. That's why I'm like, less fun. But the vet line, I laughed when we got to that point. I was like, oh yeah, that's clever. Like setting up like, oh yeah, the weird world that I know that we're about to go to that Thulis is not aware of. Cool. The makeup is so good, you know. And then we get into the CG stuff, and that's less good, but it was great for the time. Like the CG rats don't look good, but and like sure, like Jurassic Park came a couple years before. Way better use of it, way more judicious use of it. Like it wasn't just in broad daylight. But I remember when this movie came out, like there were like featurettes talking about, look at the innovative ways we're using CG to do stunts that a human couldn't do. So specifically when the leopard man like escapes from them, like there was this whole breakdown showing how a wireframe would jump from like rock to rock and like move like. And then it would like they filled it out with like polygons, and then they filled it out with like the textures. And so you actually saw this whole process because this is the early days of not just CG being a thing for like objects, but actually being used to replace actors in a shot, so you could do stunts that were impossible for an actor.
Yeah.
So that's interesting experiments that they're doing at the time, combined with really good puppetry. Sure, the shots could have been better, or you know, in shade, in darkness, so that you can like hide it a little bit better. But like they're making their attempts.
I kind of wish that the actually more of the beginning of the movie was a little darker. Like I feel like there was so many, like there was too much full on with some of the stuff when he first discovered the island, that I kind of like longed for the mystery of, just of other different kind of monster movies where like I feel like they could have, and like the thing is that the practical effects in this film are really good. Like, so I'm not taking anything away from that. I just wanted a little more surprise so that I could be as shocked as Edward, like because it was
absolutely.
just those first few scenes when he's on the island, when he starts walking around and he starts seeing stuff, it's just so full on. And I think it was like this obsession was like, oh, look how good these prosthetics look. But I wish that it was a little more peekaboo on those moments, and then like a full reveal for like more scare. Like I needed a little more tension built up before he accepted. Because honestly, when you get to the moment, I mean, even the birthing scene, like it looks really cool, but it might be too much scene like at once. Like, I don't know. It just didn't build tension there.
Well, yeah, that birthing scene, I'm right there with you where it's like, oh, this is like genuinely disturbing. This is gross. This is weird. It's like a minute and a half.
Yeah.
That should be like a 5-minute scene probably, where you're barely seeing stuff, and then you have this big moment where you see this insane looking goat woman giving birth, and it's just like so visceral and disgusting, which it was. But since it happens in under a minute, it doesn't really.
I think it would have been like so much cooler to kind of have the scream still go and him like behind vials of like, chemicals kind of thing, like, or like, old scientists, old like beakers, like when we think about mad scientists, kind of like shadows and light and that kind of thing. And then you can get the full on. I just needed a little more tension in that first part, because you are all of a sudden witnessing something really gruesome. And the shot, like in the baby's face screaming, is still good, but like it felt anticlimactic.
Yeah,
like compared
absolutely.
to like the whole birthing scene, which we only saw like what felt like maybe 5 seconds of, like a full, like, I don't know. Again,
Right. Well,
there's production issues. I get it. And
well,
timing.
the person turning out should have been the doctor. Like, that also would have been his first time seeing Dr. Moreau.
Yeah.
If it wasn't Marlon Brando,
that would have been great.
In that part, because like I think honestly the mother is the more shocking part of that scene than the baby.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, you see the others, and like there was this whole thing about how like the dog doctors that were going to be working with Moreau would be like licking up the blood at like in that shot as well. Like really crazy visual stuff that like would have been very cool, but to talk about like, well, how do you hide it better? Like, we could think of so many ways to do it, because you could have done like, they have all these cages, have him like trying to see through a cage, and then like it pulls focus to the jaguar or leopard or whatever that was in there that like hisses at him, and like you could have done like all this stuff to make it really dynamic and interesting.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what happened for this movie across the board is that a journeyman director came in to fill in after like the initial director who had a vision was fired and had to just get the shots in the can.
Now, speaking of Mr. Frankenheimer, are either of you familiar? Have you watched a lot of Frankenheimer movies?
I'm pulling up his resume, like not off the top of my head. So let me like actually like take a
Okay.
second.
Yeah, because I've only seen 2 of his other movies, which is the Frank Sinatra Manchurian Candidate, and then the movie Seconds, which won the Palme d'Or, which I did not know. But those movies are very twisty, very weird. As much as I know, he was saddled with, a production that was already underway, and he's also getting later in his life, because the movies I mentioned are the 60s. So, he's been working for a while. It seems pretty odd that he doesn't have at least something interesting to say when comparing it with those other 2 movies. But I don't know. I'm not familiar with any of his movies after 1966. So I don't know if you guys have any...
Yeah, I saw.
Well, I'm shocked to see that he was the director for Reindeer Games, where I'm like, okay, yeah, I remember that movie at least. Like, and I saw Ronin. Like, he continued to work.
Yeah,
probably just became kind of a studio guy in the 80s and 90s.
I mean, honestly, I think also it's just like, honestly, I think if you were on this set with like the way that these actors were acting, you're probably like, let me just get the shot and get the heck out of here.
Well, yeah. He also, at this time, he was doing a lot of TV, and he was doing a lot of TV movies. And I don't mean to like bash any of that, but a lot of that is like you're coming in, you're working for a studio, you're doing work for hire, and you're trying to get the stuff in the can so an editor can chop it together into a real movie, which is what happened here too. Like, like
that's a good
coming
point.
in late to a production. It's not just that he's coming in like and doesn't have a chance to like set all the stuff the way he wants. He also doesn't have a chance to really like feel the storyboards. Oh, also, side note, we didn't talk about this one. When Richard Stanley was fired, he destroyed all the production notes.
Oh, yeah.
So he's coming in very blind on this one. He has the script, he has the cast, he has the location. He doesn't have any of like anything else going into it. He probably had some storyboards because it probably wasn't all in Richard Stanley's possession, but all the production notes that Stanley had were destroyed. So if there were any thoughts of like, okay, we're going to shoot it this way, we're going to light it this way, he didn't have any of those. And so when it's coming into an already behind schedule film, he's probably doing his best just to kind of assemble the whole thing and not really worrying about like the mise en scène too often. Like it's like, oh, will that be a cool angle? Yes, but not necessarily getting as many elaborate camera moves, as many elaborate like focus shifts or anything to that effect. It's just doing what he can to get it together and deal with these fucking actors.
Yeah.
Oh, actors.
Yeah, funny enough, I do think the more we talk about it, I do think the another pass of it is just get the shots and get them in the can and edit the movie.
Kind of. I mean, like, because like, I don't know if you could edit a better movie here. Like, there are a few things about this movie that are like just 90s as fuck that I don't think they would have been able to fix at the time, but in retrospect, I would have loved to change. Like the opening credits look just like fucking the opening credits to Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah.
The TV show, not the movie, I should clarify.
Mm-hmm.
Like, or like Charmed, or honestly, they also look a lot like the opening credits to the Ang Lee Hulk movie, which just shows like where
oh yeah
things are
I
kind
just
of like
rewatched that the other day.
yeah, they're kind of just like superhero movies are often like catching up on things from like a couple years earlier, like in terms of like what genre that they're doing. So that's like, okay, we're doing a what hath science wrought sci-fi monster movie. This movie's in the same lineage of that all, where it's just like, look, we've got blood and cells in close up under a microscope for opening credits.
Right.
But then like the opening sequence of Thulis on that raft and the other guys fighting, because, you know, we're setting up the whole theme that humanity is the real, like, is just an animal too, that society is like barely containing. Man, that shot needed color correction. And that's just not a thing that was going to happen in that era. Like, because it's this bright orange or orange red like raft that they're on, and like all of it just doesn't like it pops in a way that I'm like, oh, but that doesn't feel like the right point. And then they've got this terrible stock footage that they're using for it all, like for like the shark that attacks them. Like the movie continues with like lots of editing tropes and lots of lines. So like we mentioned the subjugation of women in this all is very much there. Like this is still an era where they made a video game about ironically Stanley finding Dr. Livingston for the NES like just a couple years earlier, where we hadn't like really started to be like, oh man, all the terrible stuff that happened in Africa was really bad. Like we're still kind of putting like heroics like mythology and iconography on like British colonialism at this point, and it's all over this movie because this movie is about British colonialism.
Pretty much, yeah.
Or rather, the book is about British colonialism, and like, and you can't fully separate that here because it's just like a white man came to a primitive island, and in this case, it's animals instead of like quote unquote savages. Like, I feel gross talking about that, but like that's what like the ideas that they're playing with. Like it's also very, again, Apocalypse Now, like Heart of Darkness kind of stuff right there. Like it's like we're gonna come and we're gonna impose civility on this barbarous people, and actually, oh well, they've infected us with their barbarism, and the movie hasn't moved enough away from those more outdated ideas.
Yeah. You said it.
I don't know.
You put the button on it there.
This whole fucking production is just a nightmare from start to finish.
Yeah.
Like people are getting fired. Everyone has terrible commutes. They're getting rained on like crazy. There's pyrotechnics all over the place that are just burning shit down. At one point, this is actually one of the funny ones. So Richard Stanley, when he was in his dog makeup, was like one of the actors who had to have like a torch when they were going to be like setting shit on fire. And they just gave it to him. But then because when they found out that it was Richard Stanley, they're like, did he come back to burn down the set? No, they just like put him there. But man, fucking wild movie where the visionary, and I don't mean to say that in like the sort of like holier than thou thing, like Stanley had an idea for the property. He wrote the script. He had like, I want to make this movie. I have like an idea for it. They ballooned the budget way too much for what he was capable of handling at that point in his career, and they didn't provide enough structure. Like say what you will about like modern Marvel movies, like an auteur director coming from like small productions is given the team to make sure the movie still happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was not happening here. And so pretty much from start to finish, everyone was aware that this movie was going to crash and burn, and it proceeded to be a self-fulfilling prophecy every step of the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So,
mean, on that
sorry,
note,
yeah. So why don't we pause for a moment, take our medicine so that we don't devolve into ravenous animals discussing this movie, shout out one of the awesome shows on our network, and when we come back, let's see if we could actually speculate on how this movie could have been saved.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun. Whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
And we're back. All right. So Micah, there's one rule and then there's one practice that we have when we talk about the discussions.
I feel like they're
of our
both
regular
rules.
episodes.
I think that the father has decided that these are the rules.
They are
I don't-
laws.
Yeah, they are laws. These are the laws.
Yes. So law number 1 on this stone tablet that I have that I etched with my own hoof is that I am not allowed to go before Sam. Sam has made it a firm rule that I cannot come before her, since oftentimes it'll be like, here's all of my notes.
Yeah.
Not necessarily this time, but oftentimes that is the way. And law number 2, but the more common, just the practice of the conversation is that as we are being hypothetical about what could be done at the time of production, we are trying not to do things that would have been completely outside of the realm of possibilities. So things like, well, Marlon Brando probably wasn't going to get recast once he was put on the movie, because that's kind of why the movie was getting made. He's kind of locked in there. Val Kilmer is more of a subjective one. Like, we could talk about that one.
Yeah.
But like trying to be like somewhat realistic in terms of like where things could have been done to make this movie better, without just like fully like, here's pie in the sky. I'm making my own Dr. Moreau movie with no one attached to this thing, because that's not this movie. That would be just a different movie.
And I'd assume that we have to kick Richard Stanley off.
We could have a conversation about that. I think we have to have a conversation about that, frankly.
Because I'm a little dumbfounded on how to approach this. But does this mean I go first?
You are our guest, so you can either go first or you can have Sam go first. And if Sam goes first, I can then follow up, and you could take third or you could take second.
Let me throw a few ideas out, because they're very. I think you two will probably have a better approach.
I love that you feel that way about us. The belief really makes me feel good right now. Like, this is, thank you. Go on.
Yeah, I have hope in you both.
I feel like it's misguided, but go ahead.
Well, this movie is so strange, and like we've been talking about this whole time, it kind of feels like under these very specific circumstances, this is the best outcome. But something you said, Sam, stuck out to me and gave me a bit of a light bulb. Richard Stanley has this inflated budget and he goes a little too ambitious. And you mentioned Marvel, it's like he's out of his element. And this is a big change. So this might be too pie in the sky here, but I feel as though this movie would actually work if it was way smaller, lower budget, and Richard Stanley is, maybe they're working on sets or something like that. But if you changed it to where you have less of a cast and you can spend more time building tension in smaller scenes with less people, that is more manageable. I think that would be the most ideal outcome to this movie, because I think about the surgery scene, and you don't need 100 people on set to make that scene incredible. You need the actors, a couple people lighting, a good cinematographer, and you can make a killer scene. That's more of like indie horror kind of a thing. But that's also such a different approach from The Possibility. So I don't know if that counts. Does that count?
I think it
as
does.
a fix?
I think in terms of them getting too big for their britches, it's a fair concept there. Like if this movie was like $25 million instead of 40, they could have reined it in a little bit. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that kind of gets into like where we'd be thinking, like if Richard Stanley was still going to be doing this movie, like.
And that's what I'm thinking on this approach. And actually, maybe this brings a little more realism into this pitch. We're talking about New Line Cinema. This is the house that Freddie built. So they know how to put out horror movies that have low budgets, that look incredible and have incredible set pieces. Because the Nightmare on Elm Street series, whether those movies are good or bad, some of them, they always have at least one incredible sequence in them. And so I do think if Robert Shea sitting over there does not okay this to make it this grand epic that they're trying to make and instead focuses on making it smaller, I think you'd have a one of those movies that would pop up on Twitter and people would be like, how come no one talks about this wonderful relic from the 90s?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, yeah. I mean, it is if it's smaller, and there was better use of shadow. I think there's too much full on everything all of the time, so that there is not really too much suspense. And I think that when you're dealing with a smaller budget, and I don't watch a lot of horror movies because I'm a scaredy cat, which has been established on this podcast. But the few that I've been forced to watch for this podcast, a lot of the ones that are smaller budget, one of the things that works in their favor is shadow and light. And I think that this movie doesn't utilize that ever, practically.
No. And
it's all very well lit. This is a very well lit island.
Yeah. And I just think that, like, I'm a firm believer that constraint in art can breed brilliance. And sometimes there's people who have no constraints and can still make something incredible. But, I look at someone like Tim Burton, and for the most part, if he's not given constraints, his work suffers, in my opinion. So I think if this movie had been given more constraints from the get-go, I think it would have been helpful. So that's maybe my another pass at it.
Yeah.
I think you guys will do better.
Well, but I fully agree with you. And we talk about this all the time, but by having constraints that can really allow for art to flourish. I think that innovation and creativity are the things that we really want to celebrate on the show. Like, that's why when we do fifth episodes, we talk about the movies that had constraints and that they were able to work around them. And when we're talking about these kind of movies, it's usually like where a constraint would have been good. And so I think, I fully agree. Sam?
Okay. That's right, because you can't go before me. I was like, it's
right.
my turn. And of course it is, because Case has to go last. So yeah, I do agree with you on the budget. I'm going to go from a different point of view. I'm going to go in as if I've come in after the first director has been fired.
Cool.
And I'm going to say that there's a couple of things that I need in rewrites that I'm just going to demand of my cast. And I need a scene, whether it's an expansion in the greeting scene, explaining the why of it, why these experiments, what does Dr. Moreau gain by turning these animals into humans? And the fact that, he's obsessed with his daughter, right? He's obsessed with her because she's the most human looking of all of them. She's the one that has the least regression. And we learn later on in the movie that he's brought this man that was out to sea to the island to use his DNA, which is like something that's like thrown out there at the very end, which because just any man would do, because like, why didn't you take one of the sailors from the nearby town? Like, it had to be someone adrift because you thought they were dead. There's never an answer as to why he's like the perfect person.
It's that superior English stock.
Yeah. I needed a white man. So,
it is their burden.
Yeah. So I feel like because I feel like I feel like this movie has a lot of great narcissistic moments, but I feel like I need the real like villain like patting myself on the back moment that I don't really get. I don't really get that. And I need that. I need that for this to make a little more sense. The movie doesn't have to make sense, but I have to understand Dr. Moreau's point of view, and I don't actually understand what his obsession is. You know, like, is he trying to build a better race because intrinsically he thinks animals are better than people, but he feels like we couldn't communicate with them before, so he wants to make them more human-like because somehow that'll make the human race better too. Like, we're creating a new race, a far superior race, fast as a cheetah but with the intelligence of myself. He can operate, but he can also run to the scene very quickly. And I don't know. I would have just liked that, even if that comes, if Brando's not game, even if that comes from Val Kilmer, because I also feel like the problem with his character is that he just feels like someone who's like there. Right? He feels like Kato. He's Kato Kalin. He's just living in this guy's house, basically. Like, he's not. And so, like, he does say something when he brings Edward first on the island, where he basically tells him that he came here for a haven after animal rights activists were like, too in his face. And that would have been like a really great moment for like Val Kilmer to talk about what the doctor was trying to do, but like say it with like reverence, so it sounds like he's a true believer, right? Because we need to establish that between them there's a reason why this other doctor wants to be here, that he believes in this science as much as the father does, right? Like, he's actually like he actually says before he dies, like I want to go to doggy heaven, right? So like there must be.
He does say
he does. He says
that's
that.
a line in the movie.
That's a real line. So maybe he also shares this idea that like if animals and humans, if certain breeds were able to like combine like genetically, we would be more superior. And we hear that reverence in him. We don't need Brando to do that. We can have him do that. We can have them do that in the thing. That's maybe like 5, 2, 3 extra lines. And then you establish something about their relationship, which we don't see. And I assume that's partially because there is tension between them. And and oftentimes when there is tension, you cannot get 2 actors to be in the same scene together. And so, that's fine in some ways, but that would kind of fix it, and then you could have a later scene where the doctor dismisses him in a way, and then you can like actually put in him like kind of wanting to go to the baser because he wants to be an animal, and him like encouraging at least I was gonna say Boba Fett because my brain is like whatever. Because he does.
Azazelo is the character.
Azazelo to kind of embrace this more animalistic feeling, right? Like this comes, like the two of them kind of branch off together. And I think that would create like a more interesting dynamic, like the 2 children that were kind of pushed aside for his perfect children, like his daughter and De La Rosa, because they're like they're loved so much by him. But these 2 people, like this man who is more man than animal, and this animal who like doesn't always measure up, even though he's worked so hard. And I think then that makes like a more interesting situation because it's like colonization, but also like because I'm trying to create a perfect race of both of these things. So like you kind of get that whole ugly eugenics in there, and just have like an indictment on all of those things and the creation of that and where things go wrong. And I feel like, listen, this movie, no matter what, is probably going to be a trash fire, but I feel like adding that will at least add some much needed grounding that I don't think that this movie has. Like, I feel like other than like Ron Perlman, I don't feel like, because I don't understand why, I never, like, it's just like a exercise in futility. Like, we're just doing this to fuck with the laws of nature. Which, like, if that's the case, like, fine. But I'd like it stated. I'd like him to be like a full out, like if we're gonna go full, like, animated Maleficent, like, I'm destroying things for the sake of destroying things. Well, she did it because she wasn't invited to a party, and I totally respect that about her. No, I do. Like, some people, like, let people be evil for just being evil. Like, she's just like the pettiest villain ever. I get it. And if he just wants to be the biggest narcissist ever, like, I can control things. I want to feel like God. Fine. But, like, I just need a little more direction. And I think if Val Kilmer explains it and it sounds reverent, that kind of sort of fixes his character without having to cut him and being able to still keep him on the posters for my stuff to try to get back any of my money, which I'm not going to do. That's my another pass.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's more reasonable than mine.
Well, because I feel like with the actors, you're kind of fucked.
Yeah.
Sam, one thing I think you bring up that I think would have been good if it was in the spoken word of the movie, even if it is in the base text of the movie, is that the hybridization that is going on with these creatures are not, strictly speaking, animal and human combined to create the entity. There is additional stuff that's going on, and that owes to the book being set in the time of taxidermy becoming a real big thing and vivisectionists becoming really big, and like doing these like weird art pieces using animal bodies and reconfiguring different parts to create things like jackalopes kind of shit. So like when we talk about the hyena, it's actually a hyena pig hybrid that the pig part almost doesn't come into play. So if there was more of an emphasis on actually discussing, like, we are taking bits of all types of different things to put it together to create this sort of like superior race, that would have been a more interesting conversation going on as well.
Yeah.
It's not just I'm trying to give sapience to these things, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a better stock in general.
Yeah, like because he I mean, you've got an island, right? So you're basically creating it. You're clearly like you had someone give birth. You're clearly breeding this. Like, it's not just like I'm like mixing up genetics. You're like basically doing what farmers do when they like take two different types of corn and put it together, right? Like, I'm germinating these people. That's what you're doing with your hybrids that you've already created. Like, this is like, you could make a case for eugenics or against eugenics. Definitely against, please, in this movie.
So what we're getting at is that this movie should have been the tobacco episode of The Simpsons.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
All I'm saying is that would have updated the material for the 90s, right? Because we've been through, from when the book was first written to now, all the material and everything that we've been through, and, talking about genes and like, going through the Holocaust, going through like the brunt of genetics and eugenics and things like that, and facing all those things, that would have been a much more interesting conversation with all of the other interesting conversation. Because I don't want to drop any of the other themes, like the father betraying them or anything like that. But I think that would have given a little more gravitas, and also created more horror, right? Because I was almost offended at Edward's, and I've already said this, at Edward's reaction to the people in the room, because I just was like, that's fucking rude. Like, there are people just like that have like physical disabilities, sir. Like, you can't just look at people and be like, oh, they're hideous, they're missing an arm. Like, shut up. Like, that's not cool. But like, how much better would it have been if Edward would just kind of was like weirded out by these weird people, but was just kind of like, where am I? What am I doing? But then later on found out that like they're actually animals that are shaped to look like humans, or, like there's something that like is, when you realize that something was so transformed from the state that they should be, that you're changing what they should be, like their very nature of them, that you're playing with that nature, that's more horrifying than someone being disfigured. And like, honestly, like, I'm still offended that he was so horrified by their faces.
Yeah, I think that the uncanny valley is a place that this movie should live more in. And not to say like the special effects I think are great, but it is interesting that like in the book there's a lot of points where he can't identify what he's talking to, like he can't put his finger on it, like there's just something wrong, and then he finds out that they're animal hybrids, so that there could be an element of that would have been like much stronger to integrate into this work.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I mean, like kind of piggybacking off of that, like one comment I made while I was watching this movie, which is that if you were adamant about having a cat person in your movie and you needed to have an actress play the part and have no special effects going into it and still sell the fact that it's a cat person, Fairuza Balk was a perfect choice for that part. Like,
Yeah.
to be Alyssa, a cat human hybrid, and to sell, yep, no, that's she's definitely half cat or partially cat, or started off as a cat and was turned into a human. She sells it pretty well without anything else going on. Like, she's got some witch eyes that are fantastic for that part, and big white teeth that when she's like making hissing faces looks just right without, even before we get into them like adding fake canines.
I agree.
Yeah. So one thing I meant to bring up earlier that I thought would have been fun for conversation, that it's not my pitch, but I would like to mention it, that I think would sort of solve your issue. It's obviously someone else, a different creative's like approach to the island of Dr. Moreau. But in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Volume 2. So in the comic, they actually do travel to the island of Dr. Moreau because they're told by the British government they have to pick up a special hybrid to use as a weapon against the Martians from War of the Worlds, because that's the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It's all about like, let's have all the properties of British fiction like coming together in one world. In it, they're like, well, what could any of these like weird hybrids possibly do against these Martians? And like the British government like takes the package that they bring back. It's like, what the fuck's in it? It's in a box. Like all the other things we saw were like walking around animals. And it's like, oh yeah, we let him, like those hybrid things, we let him play with that. So wait, what did we get? Oh, it is a hybrid. And it's like anthrax and I forget what else. And it's like, it reveals that he was actually being tasked by the government to create biological warfare. And that the larger experiments that he was doing was like his side project, his fun time stuff. But that like what he was actually doing was creating, like I said, chemical weapons. Like, and that I thought was such a fucking cool thing. It's a great element of that, because then it also explains why the Martians all die from like the base bacteria of Earth. It's actually that the British government used a biological agent to kill them all, which is just like wonderfully cynical, but would explain why he's there. Particularly in secret, if this was actually like a British test location.
But then that would make Alan more mad about another property.
Also, yes.
and be like, they adapted another one of my things.
Yeah, I think it is an element that would have been a lot of fun to do here, but not, and would solve some of our questions. But it isn't.
Oh yeah,
it isn't a thing that we would have conceived of at the time. Like,
no,
that was just a little too clever by half, because this movie is a little too obsessed with like moments of the 90s. Like there's a spot in there where it was just like, they're afraid you'll sue us. I'm like, that's the litigious aspects of the 90s, like running wild right now,
right,
as opposed to the modern era, looking back on some of these things. For me, I think I agree that this movie should have had a smaller budget. Like, I think that you could have gotten away with just having Brando as your big star and had like more no names in the other roles there, because that caused the budget to continue to balloon. It would have been great if you didn't even get Brando attached to it all, and like you didn't have Roman Polanski making this movie and it was Richard Stanley working on it. Like, that would be a lot of fun if the studio was like, here, and also here's a team to like get your shit organized on set, because we believe in your vision, but we don't believe in your ability to run a set because you've never done anything on this scale before. That would have been amazing. And so like, I agree, like some like a lighter kind of structure would have been really good. I think that we could have had less expenses in terms of makeup, which I think would allow this movie to still be made, because while the makeup is incredible, I think that we are losing some stuff. We're losing some value at the end by overloading the front with how many like cool, like how many great like prosthetics they're putting on people. And like I said, in the book, a lot of times the character can't tell that he's talking to an animal thing until he's aware that that's what's going on. So I think that we could have had a lot more actors in the level of Azazelo, who has like minor prosthetics on his face. It's like basically Halloween store makeup that's done in like kind of a purposeful way. And I think that as the movie goes on, the ones who are rebelling should be regressing more so. So I think you could have some particular weird like freak shows earlier on, especially like for the birthing scene, and then like once his eyes are open, he starts to see it everywhere. But we should front load the movie with a lot of people who just like look a little off, and it's makeup stuff that they're doing to make them look a little bit off, and a little bit animalistic. But the movie really opens our eyes to it as things start to go wrong, and people stop taking their medicine and they regress. Like there was this idea that Stanley talks about a lot, that the poster for the 70s version of The Island of Dr. Moreau had a woman transforming into a cat as like this abstract image, like framing the central image of like the movie. So, and he was upset that never happens in the movie itself, and he wanted to have something like that. That's why Fairuza Balk later on, but it's Fairuza Balk. Why Alyssa later in the movie like fights back and like scratches at them and like climbs up a wall in like all kitty cat fashion. They wanted to have her go full cat at that moment, and then confront a dog and then die. So I think that if the movie opens with everyone being way more human and then only get into the more animalistic aspects later, that sells this devolution of the characters. Like, I couldn't tell when we got to Hyena at the end of the movie if he had a different facial structure than when we first see him, because I think he does, but like I said, I just couldn't tell for sure. Like when he first pops up and he's like worried about his friend the leopard, who's like going feral and like he's afraid of it all going bad. He certainly is not covered in blood and less like freaky looking, but I think he's supposed to look a little more human at that moment, and his snout becomes more pronounced towards the end of the movie. And if it's not that way in the movie that we got, it should be. Like as they are rebelling against the doctor and they are transformed, like they are becoming these atavistic things by way, at least mentally, they should be regressing physically as well. They should be taking on more animalistic identity to themselves. And also, I think the hyena should be female. Here's why I think beyond just like the whole in hyenas, like the sexual dimorphism lends to larger females versus males, and the males are all small little runts that are only there to impregnate the females and then be like the bottom totem pole of their pack. I think that the hyena's objection and like the sticking point is that I think hyena should be a female character being forced to exist in an artificially patriarchal society that rubs against her inner nature. That I think that as she sort of devolves into her more base hyena form, that is when her desires to conquer and to command those around and to have these sort of like aggressive alpha traits. The whole alpha male thing is kind of a bullshit thing anyway, just to mention that part. The whole idea came from like putting wolves in captivity who were completely unfamiliar with each other and seeing how they would react. And it was basically like a prison kind of scenario. It doesn't really it doesn't really clock when you like apply it to like real animals. But hyenas do have a matriarchal society where there's like a top female that is like very strong, and like her offspring usually like rank higher, but like if their mother dies, then they get like demoted to like lower ranks. So there is something of that structure going on with hyenas that actually isn't real for wolves. And I think that would be really interesting there to like have a character who it grates on being forced to see father as this lord and having like a pseudo patriarchal like kind of structure in the town. Like all the other animals are sort of like being taught to behave this way by the human male that is like warping them and manipulating them. And that her desire is like, and her own ambitions are innate to her nature, and that they don't gel with each other. It's not just taking the bad parts about humanity and ramping it up to 11. It's actually having friction with that humanity and how those structures are in play, and like have that be a thing that kind of drives her into trying to ascend to this leadership position violently. And I think that could be pretty cool. It'd also be fun, like if one of the ways that she like starts devolving is like she is fascinated by the skeleton of her friend, and like is playing sort of like a sympathetic female role there, and then maybe some of her nature kind of like gets her into like bones, because hyenas like to eat bone or like crack bones, like for marrow and stuff. It would be fun just to sort of like play with animal facts.
I mean, that's a way cooler movie.
Yeah.
that pitch is like, oh, heck yeah.
This is why he goes last.
Tickets sold.
That's
Yeah,
why he
like
goes
burn the
last.
patriarchy should be part of it, and she goes too far. But the thing is that she's not entirely wrong, because it is these human structures that are pushing them there. And that's why we can like come back around to this whole like, well, maybe Four Legs is better moment at the end, because I don't think that the movie actually sells that Four Legs better through the actual text of the movie.
No, it's just that Ron Perlman is very convincing. And we're like, yes, you are right. Whatever you say, sir. Also great horns.
Yeah.
But I think that should go for a lot of the characters who are devolving. And it's like Azazelo doesn't become more dog-like by the end of the movie. And I think that's a disservice to him. I think he should be kind of regressing into like whatever form. And that would give you more ground for like some of these really cool special effects things. And I realize that there is difficulty having multiple models, because then you can't shoot sequences, or like you can't shoot out of sequences easily if they are wildly changing from form to form, and you would need more continuity tracking. I get it. But I do admit that would be a problem. But really what I'm saying is that like you just have more shots where they have less makeup on earlier in the movie, and that would probably make it easier to film it in the first place.
Yeah, totally. Dang. See, I'm glad I went first. I was right.
Well, but we're all kind of agreeing. Like the movie was too bloated, and that it's this weird thing. And again, the special effects look great, and there are a couple good performances in there, but it lost control well before they even started filming. And once they started filming, they had no control. Stanley had no control. When he's gone, like the whole thing doesn't necessarily like come together.
Yeah.
And it's just a miracle that the movie got made in the first place. I just wish that it wasn't. Like I wish that it was less of a surprise that this movie got finished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look, it just, I think the main thing, and I think what we've said over and over, is it needed direction. It needed a point of view, a certain point of view, any point of view, actually, any point of view. And then it would have been a better movie.
But I mean, for my last thing to say on this movie is for you listeners that are film buffs and film historians, I think it's totally worth watching, and it's mercifully short. Yeah,
it's actually not that long, which, yes, that was merciful.
It's an hour 34.
Yeah, it is quite merciful. And honestly, there is some fun stuff in it. Although, again, the trivia facts are more fun than this movie. So maybe,
and the documentary, I should note, is an hour 37. So it is just slightly bigger.
Oh, man. Wow, I got to check that out. I am so excited to watch that now.
Yeah, like I would say the thing that ultimately resulted from this movie is a really interesting documentary about how much of a train wreck making this movie was. And unfortunately, to watch that really interesting documentary, you kind of need to know what the movie they're talking about is.
Yeah.
So like, you can't come in like fully blind. But that said, the documentary is on Freevee right now.
There's two very good piano scenes in this, guys. Like,
that's true.
I'm selling that to you. And when Hyena,
for all you Steinway heads, wow, you're gonna love this.
And when Hyena ultimately decides to walk into the house and fire, that's actually it's a pretty moving moment. So, watch the movie. Do your laundry, have it next to you for folding, and watch this movie. Or, if you have a project like crochet or knitting or, just anything. I'm gonna go with Micah. I'm gonna recommend. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's when this movie came out, I was so excited for it because I am such a mark for anthropomorphic animals. Like that's
shocker to everyone who
no surprise to anyone listening to this series at this point. Like superhero stuff and animal people, like those are where I'm gonna go on all of this.
Yeah,
but we mentioned Jurassic Park a few times, and I think that the reason why it's hard not to mention, aside from like just the special effects breakthroughs that are going on, is that it's doing the same story, but adding a 20th century or particularly a late 20th century sort of pressure on the characters. Like the thing that is driving everything in that movie are these commercial ventures, are the interest in paleontology, which was nascent at the time that this movie, or at the book, The Island of Dr. Moreau, was written. And the book, The Island of Dr. Moreau, is dealing with a lot of pressures that we are no longer experiencing in the same way. Like, the science that we're concerned about has changed. The things that we are afraid of have changed. Now, some of that have scars that have not healed, and maybe that would be interesting. But they're not happening in the same fresh way that is happening in this movie by way of being a modern thing. It feels like this movie is an atavistic regression towards an earlier colonial period that it doesn't really have any commentary about. And that's sort of the disappointing part. Like, a more modern movie we would want it to kind of deal with more modern issues. And aside from it being like, well, now it's genes instead of surgery, but the surgery still is happening and all that stuff is still happening. They're just like new buzzwords that they're throwing in there. It hasn't really refined its point of view. And it would just be nice if it had like a point of view to go on.
Yeah.
So no voiceovers and fucking have a thesis statement. Christ, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, go check out the documentary based on this one. If you listen to this and you have seen the movie but never saw the documentary, go check that out. If you haven't seen the movie and you're like, what the fuck is this thing? It's real. You can watch it.
It's real.
It's a real thing.
It's
should
real.
you spend a lot of money? No. I bought it because I have a habit of buying these things when the price difference between renting and buying is pretty low. And it was like, I think like $9 to rent and $3 to rent, or probably $3 to rent and like $9 to buy. Will I be questioning myself in the future when I'm like, well, why did I buy this thing? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
but
you should. You should have just watched this once and just taken really good notes, friend.
Right. But the documentary is out there. That one is free to watch. Go check that out. And then, check out stuff that our guest is doing. Micah, you have stuff to plug.
I do, yes. The first thing I want to plug is I want to go to Dog Heaven. And then the second
Sounds like the best. Oh
Run
my
with a
God.
pack, man.
No, so I really have two things that I'd like to plug. Number one is I came out with an album. It's a indie / alternative rock in November, and it's called A Beautiful Divorce, and it is about how the evangelical American church needs to divorce their patriotism from their faith and put the teachings of Christ above their love of a political party. So that is an album that I made, and I'm very proud of it. And wherever you're at, faith or not, I think there's stuff to enjoy on the album. So check it out on any platforms, and it's just my name, Micah McCaw. And then number two is I host a podcast with my wife, the McCaw Podcast Universe, and we exist to prove people wrong when they say sequels are never better than the originals. And we go through film franchises and just one at a time, and it's a lot of fun. I think this is coming out relatively soon. Is that correct?
Yeah, it'll be like 2 months after we record.
Oh, 2 months after? Okay, so we'll probably be in the throes of X-Men at the time, which we have put off for many years, but now we're finally covering all 13 X-Men movies.
Oh my gosh, what a feat.
Yes. But yeah, we recently did like the Sergio Leone Man with No Name trilogy, which was a lot of fun. And this year we got a lot of good series to cover, so that's always fun.
Yeah, that's really fun when you do those like bigger series because there are going to be those like really stellar entries into it all. Like currently when this episode is being recorded, we're in the midst of our Planet of the Apes retrospective. So like right before this, the Escape from the Planet of the Apes movie or episode dropped. And that movie I think is amazing and does a fantastic job of like flipping the script of the original Planet of the Apes movie. So like it's fun when you can see like, well, we tried one thing. What if we tried this other thing? And if the series keeps on going, eventually you'll get to some like truly incredible kind of things. Like you mentioned X-Men, like, man, like they got to Logan eventually.
Right. Yeah.
No, it's crazy. And it's, I fell off the X-Men movies, so I'm kind of excited to finally watch the newer team. I only watched First Class and then I stopped watching them.
Yeah, that's what I did.
And of course I've seen Logan, but so that's going to be fun, especially because we've covered the MCU, and I'm sure soon-ish the X-Men will join, so we'll both be prepared by the time they join. So, and you two are both welcome. We'd both love to have you on the show either together or separate to talk about, I'll give you a list of movies and you can come on
sounds good.
when you want.
Absolutely. Always happy to have crossovers
Yeah.
between our franchise and other people's universe of podcasting.
Yeah.
So yeah, awesome. We'll talk about that off mic. But everyone should go check that out. That sounds like a fantastic series. I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to check it out already. But I swear I will before I come on.
Yeah.
And then they should check out Sam. Sam, what are you doing?
I'm trying to figure out how I can get to dog heaven. So other than finding me here and on our Discord, which I sometimes remember exists, I will be very busy figuring that out because I want to pet all the dogs in dog heaven because I'm sure dog heaven is the best heaven. And if you have any complaints about anything that I said today, whether you were insulted by me being insulted by Edward, or you happen to think that Case is right and we should have had Jared Leto as Dr. Moreau, or in a future one, please don't put that into the universe, Samantha. Yes, you did. I heard you say it.
I'm like, what? Did I fall asleep?
You're like, I want a narcissist that looks like Jesus. Like, I heard Jared Leto. If you agree with Case, that's fine. You can find him at...
Well, if you want to come at me about my take that Jared Leto would be a better Dr. Moreau because it's Morbin time, you can find me on Twitter or wherever we all decide the social media landscape is going to go to at Case Aiken, because that's my brand on all things except for Instagram, where I go at Quetzalcoatl5 because I am holding on to that AIM screen name from high school for dear life. So check that out there. You can find the show on Twitter at Another Pass. You can find more episodes on our website, where you can also find a link to our Discord server. At that Discord server that Sam sometimes remember is there, you can get sneak peeks for upcoming episodes. You can engage in great conversations with what's going on. We've got a lot of great shows on our podcast network that are very good at setting up wonderful conversations about the things that they've got going on. I'm going to give a shout out to Fun and Games with Matt and Jeff for a couple of reasons. One, Matt is the person who introduced us to Micah, but also coming up, and by the time this drops, their 100th episode of the Side Quest series will have come out, which is a wonderful project where people come on and just gush for 5 to 15 minutes about a video game that really meant something to them. So check that out. It's part of the Fun and Games feed, and that feed has gotten really strong. They've done some wonderful stuff. They have a Patreon now that you should check out. That's a good old time. Check that out. And they do wonderful conversations on our Discord about video games. There's what people have just finished. There's lots of video game news discussion going on our Discord server. So check all that out if you like video games. If you like movie stuff, we also have conversations about that. Comic stuff, also that. Again, great place to come and just sort of celebrate. But then you should head back over to certainpov.com, where you can see what's coming on with this show. Right now, just before this episode dropped, we have started our retrospective series looking at the early era of this podcast, which is, I admit, a bit navel-gazing, but also a good way for us to say, hey, we've changed our mind, or give Sam a chance to weigh in on some of the early movies that we covered before she came on board. So check out those Another Pass episodes that are going to be dropping in the off weeks on this feed. But in the meantime, once you have caught up on all of those, Sam, what have we got coming up next time?
Well, next time we'll be talking about Highlander 2, The Quickening. But until then, if you enjoyed this, pass it on.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Another Pass is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Sam Alicea and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Matt Storm. Our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our intro theme is by Vin Macri, and our outro theme is by Matt Brogan.
And we'll do a clap so that when Matt, who is also our editor, is actually looking at this.
Hi, Matt.
Hey, Matt.
We all love you, Matt.
We all love you.
Me more than Sam.
Not at all. That is a bold-faced lie. You know it, Matt. I mean, I think previous recordings are all the proof you need. Case is just trying to get in on the action while he can. It's, it's just not going to. Facts are there. Recordings are there.
Recordings in progress.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.